Hello, welcome everybody. Happy Easter Sunday. John Perry here today with Sunday Morning Science. I was going to have my brother on today, my twin brother. He We were planning to do it because people always, my friends and family like to send me text messages from time to time asking me questions about evolution. And Mike was having some questions about, you know, if microbes can evolve so quickly because their generations are so short, why is it that they cannot overtake, humans and other multi-celled organisms that reproduce slowly? Why is it that they don't just get an advantage and cause the extinction of these larger organisms? So that's what we were going to talk about today, but then we realized, oh, it's Easter, and his kids are going to be hassling him in the morning if he tries to do a show, because it's Easter and they want to go find eggs and candy as is tradition in his house. So that didn't work out, but he'll probably come on next week to talk about that, and that'll be a fun conversation. So today I just wanted to do, something fun about the evolution of ears. I mean, ears. Come on, it's Easter, so um, let's see here. Welcome everybody. I'm seeing quite a few people in the chat now. In Brazil, it's 12 o'clock, I'm told. You're just an hour off from me. If that's 12 noon, yeah, that would make sense. Are you in Sao Paulo? Feliz Pascua. Let's see. So, it's Easter. So might as well talk about the evolution of ears, right? Here's my Easter rabbit, my Jack Rabbit here. And there's all sorts of cool things we can talk about with the evolution of ears. But I was thinking about this week because I saw a video, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit, about how the bones inside the inner ear work. And this just got me thinking, well, let me just show you. So sound in general it's super interesting how it works. And maybe this is super elementary for people, but I actually didn't really get into how sound works until probably, I don't know, 3 years ago or so when I started really trying to understand the physics of it. But, sound, I think it's general knowledge that sound is just compressed air. So here we have this little diagram where the dots here represent air molecules. Now, air molecules don't actually just sit there like this and bounce off of each other. They're actually bouncing off of each other in every which way, constantly colliding with one another. But a sound wave is when you have something that, pushes them and they create this wave pattern. And when that wave pattern hits your ear, your brain interprets that as sound. So there's just a certain frequency where it works. I mean, if there's too much air moving all at once, you would interpret that as wind, right? Or if there's too much, it can be it's non-audible. There's just a very specific frequency that you can actually detect with your ears. But that's essentially what sound is. It's air compressing and decompressing in these little waves. That then hits the eardrum and ends up going into the cochlea. So that's the cochlea there. That's the part of your ear that actually does the hearing. And I know for most people this is kind of review, but the cochlea is where the actual hearing takes place. And if you look inside the cochlea, there are all these little, what we call hair cells. Those are not individual cells. There's actually one cell, and those hairs stick out of the top, and they're not really hairs. They're I guess microtubules coming out of the cell membrane. The cell membrane is actually surrounding them. So they're little protrusions in the outside of the cell, and when the sound passes over them, they wiggle, and that wiggling causes an action potential, which causes a nerve reaction, and the signal is sent to your brain. So that's it's amazing how this works. I mean, everything, all of our sensory organs, the nerves in your hand, the nerves in your retina, the nerves in your ear, all they're doing is they're transforming physical events. In the case of your eyeball, it's a reaction with a photon. In the case of your ear, it's the bending of these little hairs. You're taking physical events from the outside world and converting that into impulses that your brain can then try and make sense of. And that's basically how everything works. It's crazy that things work this way. And feel free to put down any questions in the comments there. And when you do at stated casually, and make sure you put the space between stated and casually, and that will highlight it so I can see it. I don't have anyone helping me with the comments today, so it's going to be a little bit harder for me to see people's questions. So if you can do that, that'll be helpful. So yeah, so that's basically how the ear works. And your eardrum, however, is fairly far away from the cochlea, from the actual part of your ear that does the hearing. So the eardrum is separated by the cochlea by these three little bones here. And I guess I never thought about how weird this is. Like, why is that? Why are they separated? Why isn't the eardrum just like on the side of the cochlea itself? And it turns out that the reason for this is that the cochlea is filled with liquid. And if you know anything about, well, if you've ever been swimming, you know that if you're under the water and someone's talking to you from above the water, it's extremely muffled. And this is the reason these little bones exist. These bones help magnify the sounds that the eardrum hears, and then right here, they actually are pounded into the cochlea. There's a little window there, another little membrane there, where this last bone hits the cochlea, and it transfers those sound vibrations into the liquid of the cochlea. And the reason that you need all this entire lever system is because liquid is harder to move, it's harder to vibrate than air is. So this magnifies the sounds that you're hearing. It makes it so that they're not muffled when you're trying to listen to someone talk, because we live in the air, and for some silly reason, our hair cells are in liquid. And this when I started thinking about this was kind of a mystery to me, because I know, having talked to my entomology friends, that insects hear with their antenna. They don't. This design, if you will, is unnecessary. The fact that you have your sensory organs covered in water, essentially. I mean, it's not just water. There's other molecules in there and inside the cochlea. But why on earth is it that everything's just coated in water when that's completely unnecessary? Insects don't do that. They actually sense vibrations in the air directly. With some do it with their antenna, some do it with little tiny hairs sticking out of their body. So why can't we just do that? Why can't we just have an ear that works in the air? That would be so much simpler than having to have this entire lever system here. Now, there's a wonderful video that got me thinking about this, actually. This was the thing that stimulated my thoughts on this week, by Steve Mould. If you are not watching his videos, you really should. I would say he focuses mostly on physics, but his stuff, man, it's so good. He talks a lot about he builds these little models and films himself playing with them. Here he's playing with a wave machine that he'd made to show you why you need to have a lever in between the eardrum and the ear, the cochlea. And this video is just absolutely amazing. And so what he does in that video is he explains what the lever does, why that lever is so important. But he didn't address this question of, why on earth are our auditory sensors stuck inside of liquid in the first place? Why on earth did that happen? So that's what got me thinking about this. Why do we need to do this? And the answer, of course, well, here's a diagram showing how insect hearing works. They actually do it in their antenna. But the answer to why our ears are stuck in a tube filled with water is fish. Fish are the reason. Our ears evolved from fish ears. And if you're not super familiar with fish anatomy, that might sound weird. Like, fish have ears. I've never seen a fish's ear before, but they do have ears. They have little ears, internal ears inside their heads. Here's a drawing of one. Here's the actual photo of one down here. And inside those ears, we also have, excuse me, we also have the hair cells. And you can see the cells here with the hair sticking off the top. I believe my next slide has, yes. So this is actually from a fish. What's colored blue here, this is an electron microscope image. The blue things colored here are the hair, the ear, the hearing hairs of a fish. So our ears came from theirs, and you can see their inner ear is actually very similar to ours. This is from a sea bass, I believe. This one here, the one pictured here, and it's very similar. I mean, the vestibular organ up here, which helps you get your balance, that's already well developed in fish. They can actually keep their balance underwater. So all this stuff evolved in fish, and it was so well perfected at the time that our ancient ancestors, started coming out of the water, that all of us are stuck with the fish design. All tetrapods, so all four-legged animals with backbones, plus snakes and a couple others that have lost their limbs since then. But all of us vertebrates are stuck with fish ears. And so for those of us who live on land, that means that our hearing is not good until we evolve some way to transfer the sound from the air to the inner ear. So you might have heard that there's a lot of reptiles that have horrible hearing, and it's because they haven't really developed a good solution to this problem. Mammals did. They found a very unique solution with the three-bone system. Birds found a different one, and lots of different reptiles have found different solutions to transfer the sound from air into this liquid environment. But that liquid environment comes from fish, because fish, and actually any animal that's living in the water, doesn't need that special system. If you live in the water, and actually whales, this system is actually broken in whales. It doesn't do the same thing at all in whales. And whale hearing is not super well understood, but they no longer use this three-bone system. The bones are still there, but they're not being used in the same way. And you just don't need that. If you're underwater, you don't need this magnification. You can hear other things underwater just fine without it, because the water is the same density as the liquid, roughly the same density as the liquid inside the cochlea, and so you do not need this magnification mechanism at all, this lever to magnify the sound. But yeah, that is the answer to this question of why our ears need all this fancy equipment in order for us to hear on land. It's because they evolved from fish ears. And things get even stranger than this. If I go forward here. You've probably noticed on the side of a trout, or any fish really, there is this line. It's called the lateral line. And you may have heard that the purpose of that organ is to detect water pressure. And it's actually more than that. Not only can they detect water pressure, so they can roughly figure out how deep they are, they could also detect really tiny vibrations and water pressure around them, which helps them when they're swimming in a school. They can actually feel, without seeing, they can feel their neighbors' movements, and they're extremely sensitive. Predators will use this sensory organ to follow the pathway of their prey as they're swimming through water. They leave these little wakes, and those can be sensed with the lateral line, so it can help them hunt their prey. It's an extremely useful organ, and it turns out that it is filled with hearing cells. These same hair cells that we saw earlier, what we call hair cells, that are used for hearing in the inner ear are found in the lateral line. And it's actually not clear which organ evolved first. The lateral line and the inner ear is found on the most primitive of fish, the jawless fish. And so we're not sure which one evolved first. And of course, neither of these structures leave a very good fossil record. But it's just really interesting. The same system exists. It's basically like a fish has a giant ear stretching all the way back to its tail, which is really cool. So anyway, I came across this fact this week, and I had to talk about it. It's so cool. The reason that our ears are so weird and require all this fancy machinery is because they evolved from fish, and we've had to tinker with them since to make them work on land. So I've got a question here from Keith Langford. Are there examples of dry ears? Yes, maybe you weren't here when I was talking about that earlier, but insects actually have dry ears. Some use their antenna, some have patches of their exoskeleton with extremely fine hairs that stick out, and we found that through different experiments that if we stick electrodes to the nerves that come out of those on the backside, we can actually stimulate them with sound, and we see that they are actually sound receptors. So there's actually a bunch of different ways that insects have evolved hearing that all use a dry system. They don't have this problem of the sensor being covered in liquid. And why is it that insects were able to do that while we were stuck with wet ears? It's probably just because our ears were so developed before our ancestors came onto land. I mean, they're extremely well developed in fish. The other possibility might just be that insects have been on land for so stinking long that, because their ancestors were aquatic as well, but they've been on land for so long, that so much longer than us, so much longer than tetrapods have, that they've been able to develop this adaptation where they actually have dry ears. So yeah, it would be more efficient, but it's really difficult for evolution to kind of, when something's working pretty well, because even a muffled ear, because you're out on land, just like your ears work okay in the water, when you're trying to hear someone above the water, you can't hear very well, but it's muffled, but it still does work. And in order for a new hearing system to evolve, it really has to be better than the one you currently have. And for a totally new system to evolve in a tetrapod that already has sort of muffled hearing, well, it's a lot easier for that muffled hearing, for some sort of adaptation to start that makes that muffled hearing better on land than some adaptation to start that's rebuilding an auditory system from scratch. And so that's why evolution gets stuck with these really bad designs that it has to tinker with to make work. We now have a system that can fail in many different ways instead of a system that could only fail in the cochlea, right? We now have a system that can fail at the eardrum. It can fail at the lever system between the eardrum and the cochlea, and it can fail in the cochlea. So we're now vulnerable to all sorts of horrible things happening to us that we wouldn't be if we were, like insects, just evolved an auditory system from scratch. But the selection pressure was set up in a way when we first came out onto land that just really wasn't an option for us. So it's neat to find things like this that show us what our history is. These little features in our evolutionary design, if you want to call it that just really demonstrate, hey, your ancestors were fish. So that's what got me excited about this when I saw it. Please feel free to ask some more questions here. Are the bones in our ears also to be found in other species? Yes, they are. Birds and reptiles just have one. We have 3 bones. Let me get back to that slide here. So you can't see it super well in this diagram, but we actually have three bones. And reptiles and birds only have one. This little round one down here actually just connects from the cochlea straight to the eardrum in birds and reptiles. And most birds and reptiles. Some of them have weird systems instead that they've evolved. But these other two bones actually came from our jaws. So that if you look at mammal evolution, the early reptile-like mammals, they had a jaw bone much like reptiles do today, where there's actually there's several bones in the jaw, and the jaw articulates in a very different way on the skull. So I don't have my bird skulls here with me in Canada because I was actually borrowing them from a wildlife center when I used to do videos on those. If you go back, you can see, if you go back through the stated casually videos, you can see when I do, there's a series of videos on What's It Wednesday where I show off different skulls and I talk about their anatomy. And if you go back and look at that, you can see how different mammal articulation of the jaw is compared to birds and compared to reptiles. I actually didn't ever do a reptile skull, but I did bird skulls. I think I might have showed I showed pictures of a crocodile skull. I never had one. But in those videos, you can see how weird it is that these reptiles and birds have an extra bone in their jaw, and their lower jaw, and in their upper jaw, and mammals don't seem to have that. They seem to have lost those two bones. Well, those two bones actually went into the inner ear. A lot of reptiles use their jaw to magnify their hearing abilities. So snakes, I'm sure you've heard about this, that they can only hear when they have their head on the ground. They actually have an inner ear. They've got the same sensory organs inside that we do. They have a version of the cochlea. It's not wound up like ours is, but they have something similar to the cochlea, and it's got the hair cells inside there. But they use their jaw bone, their entire jaw, to pick up vibrations in the ground, and they can't hear that well when their head is lifted up. What our ancestors did is, you can actually see this in the evolution of mammals. Their jaw starts to articulate on two different spots, and then it switches from one to the other, and then there's this extra piece of bone that's doing nothing, and that ends up migrating into the ear over evolutionary time. And a bone from the top of the skull migrates into the ear as well, and then you get this three-bone system that really does a good job magnifying sound. So that is something you can see in the fossil record. Unfortunately, I did not prepare slides to show that to you, but let's see. The cynodonts already had those ear bones, right? I can't remember which actual species the transition occurs in, but there are what group of animals the transition occurs in, but there is one species where you can see the jaw articulates in two different ways, and it's really neat because it shows you this huge transition in jaw morphology, where I don't know actually how it would have even worked in this organism. They must have had a lot of cartilage in there and needed a fairly loose jaw. Maybe they were opening their mouths so wide that they needed a really loose articulation. But there is a fossil species, and I am forgetting the name. If anyone knows it, let me know in the comments here. But it's really neat because you can see that the jaw articulates in two spots, and then from there we get this switch to a completely different articulation method in mammals that just didn't happen in other organisms, and that freed up this bone to be used in the ear. Anthony asks, arthropods also come from water. Did they use their antenna for hearing in water? I'm actually not sure about that. Probably. The thing about insects is that they have a lot of sensory organs that stick out of their body as little spike-like things, and those can sense all sorts of vibrations. And there's a lot of different. the weird thing about insects and arthropods in general is that they just have tons of different ways to sense vibrations. Uh, their 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 antenna can do all sorts of things, from sensing smells to sounds to tasting their food and so on. And they're yeah, I'm sure there's lots of different ways that insects are hearing in the water, because there's lots of different ways that they're hearing on land as well. Let's see. M5 says the jaws came from the gills, the ear bones came from the jaw, and the whales use their jaws to hear underwater. Evolution is a mess. Yeah, nothing really happens in a straight line. So whales have a special glob of fat in their jaw that helps them also magnify sound, which is really interesting. And like I said, that their ear is all their inner ear. You can tell it came from a normal mammalian inner ear, because the three bones are in there, but they don't function the way that they do in land mammals. So anyway, I think that answers the question. Oh, what, do insects come from water before our ancestors? Yes, insects came out on land way before the rest of us did. Us tetrapods did, and I'm really bad with numbers, so I can't tell you exactly when that happened, like how much earlier. But yeah, crustaceans have been living on land for a very, very long time, and yeah, there's crustaceans are coming out on land, have been evolving onto land and back on into the sea again ever since. I've got a video called "The Evidence of Evolution at the Beach," which is on this channel, Stated Casually channel, and that talks about the evolution of lawn shrimp, and it's a more recent transition from the land to the land from the sea. But yeah, crustaceans have been doing this way longer than we have. I mean, tetrapods have been going back and forth from land to sea quite a bit too. You've got the first big event where you get the first true amphibians evolving from fish, but then you get all sorts of returns back to the sea. You have sea turtles, for example, have gone back to the sea from the land. Whales, sea lions are intermediate. Otters are intermediate. You have these semi-aquatic mammals. You have all of the marine reptiles, all the marine reptiles that were living alongside the dinosaurs. There's a whole bunch of them, a bunch of different transitions back into the sea. So evolution really is a mess. It doesn't just go one way. It goes. A lineage will just follow the opportunities that happen to be in front of it during its current, time period. And opportunities, where the best opportunities are, that changes over time. Sometimes the water is better than land. Sometimes land is better than water, and it's just it's a mess. Evolution is a mess. Does Archaeopteryx have reptile or bird ears and jaw? So birds have ears that are very similar to crocodiles. And I don't think that we have the inner ear bones of Archaeopteryx. I don't think that I've never seen them before, if they have been preserved. I mean, Archaeopteryx is tiny, and then those bones would have been super tiny. But yeah, I think the difference between a bird ear and a crocodile ear would be extremely hard to tell in the fossil record. So, and by the way, birds and crocodiles are the animal most closely related to birds that's alive today. It's the crocodiles. Those are the closest living relatives to birds, and they have a very similar jaw. The articulation is in the same spot, and the ears are very similar. So anyway, that was a rather short. Oh, I got one more question. Do whales use their ears and echolocation or some other structure? Yes, they are using their ears. It's their hearing is what they're using. And something interesting, there's a there's a protein in the ear called prestin, and it's actually used not by the hair cells that I was showing you, but by a different set of hair cells that are used to magnify sound inside the cochlea. And it's this really elastic structure, and it attaches. I'm stepping out of my lane trying to explain how this works. It's been years since I read about this, but it attaches two membranes together inside the cochlea, I believe, and it's really elastic, and it actually responds to sound itself and will pull tight when it's stimulated by sound, and it's pulling on a membrane, and that increases the sound inside the ear. And whales have a very special prestin protein that helps them hear really, really high frequencies. Well, dolphins and so on do, and that aids in their echolocation. But yeah, they're just using their ears. Let's see. Yeah, happy Easter, everyone. This was another episode of Sunday Morning Science. Hopefully that was informative. I had a good time. That was kind of one of my random rabbit holes I went into this week, just reading different papers. And I actually I believe I have in my slides, I believe I included the paper. Here it is. Let me show you. This is the paper on the sensory hair cell death and regeneration in fishes, and it explains how it's about cell death and regeneration. So they're trying to study how deafness works when these hair cells get messed up in the human ear, and they're using fish as a model, and they talk about how the lateral line can be used, or the actual ear of the fish can be used. And in this paper, they make an argument for using the inner ear. I didn't know this until I had read this paper, but in the past, almost all of our research on hearing was done on the lateral line of fish because it's so easily accessible. It's really easy to study how these cells work on the side of a fish. But this paper is recommending that we look more at the actual ear of fish, because fish are really easy to raise in a lab, and it is harder to get access to the ear of a fish, but the cells inside there act a little bit more similar to the cells in the human ear. So anyway, let's see. Keith asks, are there other fluids in our body that are leftovers from fish? Yeah, I mean, our blood is, we evolved in the ocean, and you can actually think of our body as kind of like a space suit for living on land, or our skin is, or we've got a reverse wetsuit that we're wearing, because our skin just holds in moisture, and it holds in what is essentially salt water, right? Our cells evolved in a marine environment, and all cells need something very similar to a marine environment. So our blood and the fluid in our cells is very similar to the salt content of the ocean. It's not exact, but this is because of our evolutionary history. So a lot of our body shows this marine ancestry that we have. I'm getting a happy Easter from my dad. Oh, my dad's watching. Happy Easter to you. And yeah, next week I will probably have Mike on. Hopefully that will be next week, and we're going to talk about why it is that multicelled organisms like ourselves, and by the way, Mike is my identical twin brother. We're going to be talking about why it is that multicelled organisms like ourselves, which evolve so slowly because it takes so long for us to reproduce, why it is that microbes cannot evolve so fast that they can overtake us and cause our extinction. That was the question that he had for me, which kind of stimulated by all this, new thought process everyone is having with the virus and with virus evolution, kind of asking these questions. And I thought that was a really cool question to dive into because the answers to it are really interesting. And it's, we'll probably take a whole hour talking about that. So I'm excited about that. So long for now. Stay curious.